So this is a video to show you how to paint with wet on wet, wet water and wet paint and wet paper. So the first thing you want to do is you want to soak your paper. So you put it in the water. Make sure that it gets covered up with water. And then you're going to leave it there for about a minute. And while we leave it there, we are going to mix up the paint. So you take some paint out of a tube and squirt it in the bottom of your dish. And then you add a little bit of water. And then you have to mix it up so that your paint becomes liquid. And with this paint that comes out of a tube, you have to mix it quite a bit to get all those lumps out. So that's pretty good. But then if you use paint that comes in a jar, like this Stuckmar paint, it's more liquid to begin with. So you can pour some in, but you're still going to need to add some water to it. And mix it up. And then you want to test it on a little piece of paper. Just make sure that it's strong enough. So that's pretty good. And then we'll test the yellow. And so that's a little bit pale. So mix it up and make sure I got all the lumps out. That's a little bit better. But if you wanted it to be even a little bit stronger, one thing you can do is to put a little paint on the side of your dish, and then you can squish it to get it to mix up. And then so you've got a yellow pool of paint and a blue pool of paint. So that's the first part of wet, is that the paint is wet. Now on wet, the wet on wet part, is that you now take your paper out of the water, and you can let it drip off a little bit. But then you place it on your board and sponge it off so that it's nice and smooth. If you get a bubble, you could lift it up and put a little water underneath if the board is dry, and then smooth it down again with your sponge. And then you're ready to paint. So first off, you get your brush wet. And for this demonstration, we're going to paint with blue and yellow, just to kind of get the idea of what it's like to start with one color, add another color, and see what happens when they mix. And you can do this with all sorts of colors, just to get the idea of how to paint on wet paper. So take some yellow and start on one side of the page. And while I'm painting, I'm just watching this yellow, letting it move, letting it get bigger, not being too worried about anything about how its shape it is or what it's doing, but just inviting it to live on my paper. If I want it to be stronger, I just add a little more. until it's kind of sitting comfortably over here. Like, oh, it has this side of the page. And then I rinse my brush and I dry it off on a rag, and then I can dip in blue. So on this side of the page, blue is going to come. And the same thing happens. It just kind of gradually grows. And I just try to be aware of what's happening in the blue. What's blue like compared to yellow? How does it feel? I got a little dot of yellow up here, so you're going to see what happens when we bump into it in a minute. And the blue can approach the yellow. Then, so now we've got them, both of them sitting comfortably on the page. So now we can go back to the yellow. And see, there's a little bit of blue in that, in my brush, which makes it green. But since we're just about ready to get green anyway, that's kind of okay. And now I'll rinse my brush, and then I'll rinse it again in the other water. That'll help it get everything out of it. And then I can go back to the yellow and let it come in like this. So I start getting all these different tones of green. Then it's kind of time for blue to get another turn. And you can just keep going, letting it change, letting one go over the other. And just watch what happens inside yourself as paper becomes more and more green. Always add a little extra yellow here, make it a little more green. And then sometimes it's fun to have a smaller brush once you've got some color on there, because then you can make smaller things happen. And also with the yellow. So you could just keep painting for as long as you want, just watching it happen. Or you could decide, well, that's about what I wanted it to do. And now I know how to paint with wet paint on wet paper.